Welcome to Man in America, the voice of reason in a world gone mad. I'm your host, Seth Holhouse. As you look around in this country, I'm not sure what your experience is, but for me, the country feels broken. And I hate saying that. And there's a lot of good things that are happening in this country, and I'm not a pessimist. But when I'm honest with myself, and I'm driving through a small town or going in line at a grocery store, I can see that people are just struggling. Towns are struggling. There's a lot of businesses that are closing, being bought up, and you have these giant corporations moving in instead. Families are broken. I think that COVID split us apart as a society, and we haven't really come back together yet. And of course, there are a lot of amazing things going on. And so trust me, I'm really fundamentally, I'm a very rosy lens kind of person. I see that there's a huge movement, to homeschooling, and people are finding ways of coming together. There's a revival of faith and virtue, but the infrastructure, the system, the bones of this country are broken. I'm not sure where they're going. And joining me today is my good friend Alex Newman, who is an investigative journalist, an author, a speaker, very well traveled. And I'm going to have just a very sober conversation with him about what he's seeing, because as you start asking the questions of why is America like this? How did it get like this? You start seeing that, well, if America was a car, the owner of that car has been systematically selling off all the pieces and replacing those pieces with junk and broken pieces, if not replacing them at all. And we've seen that the politicians, the people in control, have been slowly just selling off our country to China, to other foreign nations. They've been dismantling our country. But why? And who's in control of that? And who's it benefit? And why has it been done in a way that it benefits China, one of our enemies? I mean, the CCP is very open about this. Like, what's really going on here? And there was a lot of hope with Trump coming back in 2024. Hey, big changes. We're going to hopefully see some arrests and some really significant things going on. But a lot of people I'm talking to aren't feeling that hope anymore, and they're feeling dejected and thinking, what's really going on? And is Trump part of this system? And so I ask Alex that. What do you think, Alex? Is Trump part of this system? Like, how do you make sense of what's going on and the alignment with big tech and just how fractured we've become? And his answer makes a lot of sense. I'm not going to tell you the answer yet. It's in the interview. But his answer makes a lot of sense. And it makes me really think of what's coming next. So I hope that you enjoy this interview with Alex. He's a sharp guy. He's a smart guy. Apologize, my voice is a little croaky. I'm just recovering from a little bit of a cold. I'm good though, but just had a little croak in the throat. So I sound a little bit like Alex Jones today. So with all that being said, thank you for watching the show. Thank you for supporting. If you're watching on Rumble, make sure you hit that subscribe button, follow the channel, make sure you hit the thumbs up, leave a comment. I love seeing you all here. And I hope you do enjoy this interview with Alex. It's a pretty no holds barred. We're just speaking very openly about where we're at and where we're going and trying to figure out what to do on this journey. So please enjoy. Thank you. Mr. Alex Newman, it's great to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you very much for having me, Seth.
So you are an investigative journalist of many things, and you're not someone who sits behind a keyboard in your basement writing articles. You're going to the places, and you were recently in Brazil for the UN Climate Summit, which I'm sure is full of all kinds of great ideas on how to save the whales and eliminate the people, right? So I'm going to pull up a recent article on the Epoch Times about this, because this is going to open up a lot of different dialogues for you and I to have today. So CCP plays power broker at the UN Climate Summit. So I would love to hear some of the details on this, but also then I wanted to kind of take this and look at how this turns into the education of the youth, which I know a lot of the climate agendas are really targeting the youth of the education, how that ties into homeschools and the UN and all that. But I guess also just looking at the bigger picture of the CCP, because I think that there's been, especially on the right, a lot of focus on Israel. And I think a lot of it is warranted. I'm not rejecting it. There's some very valid points being made, but what's happened and what I've seen in the past couple of years is CCP has very quietly kind of pulled itself out of the limelight as being one of the main enemies of the United States and one of our freedoms, especially on the right, where again they're very focused on Israel. And you rarely see Nick Fuentes or someone like that talking about the things that the CCP is doing and that the communist bloc is actively doing in this world. And so I think it's good to make sure that we're looking at all sides and kind of turning every stone we can. So I'll just let you go wherever you want to go. We kind of have a few topics, but yeah, just go ahead and take it and run with it.
Well, thanks again, Seth. Appreciate it. And I think the CCP really needs to be looked at much more closely, not just by American conservatives, but even American liberals. You may think you're aligned with them because you're both on the left, but no, trust me, you do not want communist Chinese style governance. It is like Eric Blair, George Orwell famously said, it'll be like a boot stomping on a human face forever if these megalomaniacs end up in charge. And they're making a lot of progress through the United Nations. I have followed the CCP's role in these UN climate summits for over 15 years. I've been going to cover these for the New American Magazine since 2009. I attended I think it was the COP 14 or 15 in Copenhagen. And one of my first and most strongest memories of this climate summit was actually the CCP. They had this formula that they had developed where they were trying to calculate how many less children had been born as a result of then it was the one-child policy. Brutal, horrific, murderous policy, literally strapping 8-month pregnant women down on tables and forcibly removing their unborn babies from them. Just horrific abuses, perpetrated, by the way, in partnership with the UN Population Fund, the UN agency in charge of reducing the population. They've been exposed many times in the U.S. Congress and congressional testimony. And they had this weird formula about, each baby that wasn't born would have produced X amount of CO2. And I don't remember exactly what the numbers were, but they had this calculation. And they said, as a result of our strict family policies, we have produced X amount less of CO2 than we would have if we weren't imposing these draconian population control policies. And they expected, I guess, applause. They thought everybody would think that was great. I just remember thinking, what kind of savage, barbaric, disgusting totalitarian regime would talk about something like this as if it were a good thing?
Something strange is happening with the silver market right now, and most people have no idea. Pause for a second and think about this. Why is silver up nearly 200% in the past year? Bank of America's head of metals research just released a report saying that silver could hit $309 an ounce this year. That's Bank of America saying this. At the same time, the U.S. Mint has paused silver sales because prices are moving so fast they can't keep up. That doesn't happen in normal markets. What's going on is a global silver squeeze, with countries around the world scrambling to lock up physical silver while supply tightens. And at the same time, the old paper price rigging system, the LBMA and the COMEX, is starting to crack, which means the real value of silver and gold is beginning to emerge. Yes, silver is already at a historic high, but many experts believe this move is just getting started as the paper market breaks down and physical supply gets squeezed even further. Honestly, this could be a rare opportunity to build real generational wealth, but the window's closing. Right now, Noble Gold is still able to maintain a reliable supply of physical silver at fair prices while others are running dry. This isn't financial advice. Do your own research. But don't ignore what's happening. The window is closing. So take action today by visiting goldwithseth.com or calling 877-646-5347. Again, that's goldwithseth.com or 877-646-5347.
So that was one of my most vivid early memories of going to these COP summits. But it all really hit me in 2015. I was at the UN Climate Summit in Paris, and that's when all the pieces came together. So you had Barack Hussein Obama prancing around the place like some kind of, I don't know, Santa Claus on crystal meth, $1 trillion for you, $1 billion for you, just presents for everybody, right? And then the big announcement was, as part of the Paris Agreement, the United States, really Barack Obama, was going to slash American emissions of CO2 by, I think it was 30% over the next 10 years. So, my numbers may be off by a few percent. But that was the big news. And then the Communist Chinese promise was, oh, that's great. We think that's fantastic. You do that, Mr. Obama. We're going to be increasing our CO2 emissions for at least the next 15 years. We'll think about peaking maybe sometime around 2030. We'll see how things go. And I remembered Barack Obama saying, under my plan for energy and carbon dioxide, electricity prices are necessarily going to skyrocket. And so here you have the CCP promising to increase CO2 emissions. They were already emitting way more CO2 than the United States. The US government promising to slash CO2 emissions. And somehow that's supposed to save the climate. Now, for me, that was the clearest evidence you could ever need to know for a fact that the ringleaders of this fraud understood that it was a fraud, right? It's not like they're well-intentioned, misguided people who just think that CO2 is bad. Because if you really believed that CO2 was bad for the planet, there's nothing worse that you could do than shut down industry and energy in the United States and ship it over to communist China. Even their data shows that every unit of economic production in China releases more than twice as much CO2 as that same production would in the United States. So they have to know that this is a fraud. If they thought CO2 was really bad, they would have been horrified by this Paris scheme. Instead, they were celebrating it. And I've seen this pattern over and over and over again. A couple of years ago, we were on the Arabian Peninsula. The big prize out of that one, every year they get a new agreement that they tack onto the back of the 1992 UNFCCC, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. And the one in 2000, and I guess it was 23 that they negotiated in Dubai, was we're going to phase out fossil fuels. And yet, even the fake media was talking about how the CCP and the Arabs were caught making oil deals at the climate summit. So the whole phase out of fossil fuels, that's for you suckers in what we used to call the free world or Christendom or the West. But the Chinese communists, the Arabs, everybody, they're going to keep obviously doing this. And they even got that into the final agreement this time around in Brazil. So obviously the Trump administration boycotted it, but the final agreement has a reference. And this was in the main agreement adopted by consensus. In other words, every government in the world at least failed to lodge an objection. They said, we have a carbon budget for this planet, and we've already burned through 4/5 of it. And they've been talking about this for years. They say, well, America, you already burned more than your fair share. So the little bit that we still have left, the CCP is going to get that, India is going to get that, Brazil is going to get that, and you guys can go kick rocks. So basically, the CCP was the big winner of the COP30 summit. It was the big winner of the climate process generally. And the UN at this point is looking more and more like a wholly owned subsidiary of this mass murdering regime.
It's wild. And it's hilarious, your idea or your metaphor of Obama as a Santa Claus on meth, passing out trillions of dollars. That's kind of a funny, my mind was doing some funny things with that one. But when you look at these summits, and which you've been to a lot of them and you understand these things, whether it's the summits or the policy reports, you start to see that they're actually just chess pawns on a chessboard of, okay, how can we use this summit to achieve this goal and everything. And what you do see over time is that these goals consistently strip the United States, destroy the United States, benefit the globalists, the other power brokers, the other communist countries, et cetera. What do you see as what are they working towards with this? Like, what do you see as the CCP? What is their goal with this? It's easy to talk about, okay, yeah, CCP is the, as you say, the power broker at the climate summit. What's their intention? Where do you see them going? What is their roadmap? And is, according to the communist leaders and their vision, where are they headed with this?
Well, the CCP plan has been known for a long time. It is to take over the world. And I think a lot of the higher ranking folks within the Chinese Communist Party truly believe that they're going to succeed, that they're going to destroy or at least neutralize the United States of America. They're going to go from regional power to global power to eventually global hegemonic power, displacing the United States of America. And that would be a crazy enough idea if they were working on their own. Unfortunately, they've got the willing collaboration of American and Western political economic elites. And that has been the case going back since before Chairman Mao even took over China. I mean, you go back and look at some of the subversives within our government, people like George Marshall, who put the arms embargo on Chiang Kai-shek, basically forcing China to capitulate to the mass murdering communists. There have been people within the power structure in the United States that have desired this outcome, I believe, for many generations. They brag publicly about how they have built up the CCP into a superpower. Klaus Schwab is very proud of the role that the World Economic Forum played for 40 years, building up communist China. David Rockefeller, he went over to communist China in the early 1970s with his poodle, Henry Kissinger, and comes back and he writes in the New York Times, people should read this, called From a China Traveler, 1973, published in the opinion pages of the New York Times, that nothing but incredible praise for this dictatorship. In fact, he says the social experiment in communist China under Chairman Mao's leadership is one of the most important and successful in human history. So I think what is going on with communist China is it is serving as both the engine driving us toward this new world order that we hear so many people talking about, and also as the model, as the pilot project where we try out the crazy ideas. And to be clear, this would not be possible unless they had the aid and support of very, very powerful people in the Western world, political elites, business elites, etc. And the end goal with communist China playing a major role is to completely reshape the world. They want what they themselves call a new world order, but it needs to be based more on the Chinese view of government, more on the communist Chinese view of society, rather than the historic view that underpinned the United States of America, the kind of principles in our Declaration of Independence, that God created us equally, that God gave us rights, that we have a right to life and liberty, and that the purpose of government is to protect those rights. The system that they're building, it is political, it is economic, and it is even religious. We can touch on that as well. The system that they are building has much more in common with the CCP model than it does with the traditional American constitutional Republican model. And I think that's the end objective. Right now they're in a phase that they describe and have described for over a decade in publications such as Foreign Affairs as the move from a unipolar world order to a multipolar world order. I believe that's an interim stage as we move away from the America-centric, America-dominated world order into this new phase where all roads basically will lead to Beijing and Moscow and South Africa and Brazil. And, they're building up these governments and these economies for a reason. But then the next phase after that will be a reconsolidated global system, much more along the lines of what they do in communist China vis-a-vis government and society than what we've had historically in the West.
So, and actually, I've even pulled up that op-ed that it was David Rockefeller, right? They wrote in 1973.
Yes, that's right.
Because I've done some some deep dives into the forming of the Communist Party and how it was Yale in China, the Yale in China program that helped Mao, really get started in China, and that you can look and see actually it wasn't just these random Chinese that had these ideas of communism that then brought communism to China. It was actually a lot of wealthy bankers and European families and these kind of bloodline type families that really helped to create the communist beast of the CCP, which is now has played a significant threat. But you can see how it's been used as a tool to slowly dismantle America, right? So it's like kind of like if the globalist end goal is to take over America, okay, let's create this other beast over here and slowly feed the organs from this other healthy beast or this other healthy animal to this beast until that other animal can no longer sustain, and then it's going to be easy prey for this beast to come and consume it. But one question I have, I'd love to get your thoughts on this, is if you follow that line of thinking, then you might believe that the CCP is still then being controlled by these European banking families, these like the Rockefellers, et cetera. We know how to hand in some of the earlier things that got communism off the ground in China. And it would make you think that, so the CCP is actually just capitulating to their masters, who are these elusive, kind of elitist families that are pining for global control. But I've personally, I want to hear your thoughts. I kind of look at it as the CCP is Frankenstein's monster, that they created this thing to use, but now it realized its own strength. It realized its own abilities. It understood it had this 5,000-year history, this manifest destiny, and it would no longer submit to the fall to the knees of, or below to the feet of the banking system, et cetera, of the West. So do you think that the CCP is still just a tool of these globalists as a tool to take down America, and then globalists will end up being in control? Or do you think that the CCP actually wants to be the ones sitting at the head of the table?
I think there's actually a little bit of both there. I think when you're dealing with ruthless criminals, and you see this even at a lower level, right? Forget geopolitics for a minute. Just think of the mafia, right? You have all kinds of machinations like this, where one guy shoots the next guy higher up to become the boss, and that guy then's got to murder the next 5 deputies down so that they don't try to overthrow him. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in using that kind of analysis when you're looking at geopolitics. Now, for me, ultimately, I look at it through a biblical lens. And so I think really we're in a battle against evil. And I think there's an evil side and there's a good side, and evil players often collaborate with each other. And I don't think that's anything surprising. And I think for some people, they look at that and it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would jihadists be in an alliance with communists? And why would the globalists be working with both? Well, do they all see the world the same way? No, of course not. Do they all think they're going to end up in charge? Yeah, they do, right? The communists think they're going to have a global communist dictatorship. The jihadists think they're going to have a global regime, a global caliphate, khalifa as they call it, under the leadership of Allah's appointed individual. Then you have the globalists who think they're going to rule over the ruins of whatever's left. And I think there's almost certainly some element of each of these groups thinks it's using the other two for its own purposes. And what will happen when they finish with their common enemy, that being, us, what's left of the free world, that'll be interesting. I don't suspect that they'll have a truce for very long. The jihadists are determined that they're going to be in charge. The commies are determined that they're going to be in charge. And the globalists are determined that they're going to be in charge. But we see them helping each other all over the place, right? Like a lot of the people that are sounding the alarm about, the so-called Islamization of the West, I keep having to remind them there were virtually no Muslims involved in that process, right? It's not like there was a Muslim party in your parliament clamoring to open up the borders and import, 5 million people from the Middle East. That was all globalists and communists. Why did they do that? Was it so that Allah can be victorious? And no, of course not, right? These people don't even believe that Allah is the true deity. And so what's going on here? Well, they see the Islamic invasion, if you want to call it that, as a good battering ram for breaking down the old society. And then, as they put it, we're going to build back better, right? Are we going to build back along Islamic lines? No, right? These guys are cannon fodder. It's the same reason why Yuri Andropov sent thousands of intelligence operatives into the Middle East to radicalize a bunch of Muslims and then turn them against America and so on against the West to be apparently a battering ram against the Western world. So I think when you see it through that lens, I have no doubt in my mind that the CCP, or at least some of the people within the CCP, think they're going to end up in charge of whatever global atrocity ends up coming out of this. And they're very boastful about this now. When they ratified the 2030 agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals that they call the Master Plan for Humanity, the CCP said, "Oh, we played such a crucial role in developing this." So they're very proud of how they're shaping the world order. But at the same time, we still see the globalists and the subversives in the Western world aiding and abetting them. We still see the super capitalists. 10 years ago, George Soros said that Communist China needs to own the new world order in the same way that the United States owned the previous one. Is George Soros a Chinese communist? Well, no, right? But I think he sees it as a useful tool for his purposes. And so I think that's really how we make sense of what we're dealing with based on the information that I've analyzed over the last 15 years.
So it's almost like you have say you're living in Italy and 100 years ago, and you have a small little village that's independent and successful and healthy, and there's these two big mob families that are both kind of encroaching on the small village that has all the resources, and they're enemies, but they've realized that they're going to work together to kind of take over the village and think that there's going to be some sort of unity, or I guess each person thinks they're going to be the ones that are going to be in charge of the village once it gets taken over. And even Soros is interesting. I remember that maybe it was 4 or 5 years ago that he had some spats with Xi Jinping, and he was calling Xi Jinping the greatest threat to open societies around the world. And Chinese state-run media were calling George Soros the son of Satan. And so you had, I'm sure you recall that because you were following these things. It's just, it's hard to make sense of what's really going on.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, like Larry Fink, right? Larry Fink through BlackRock has been funneling enormous amounts of American capital to Chinese companies, if you want to call them that. Really, they're arms of the People's Liberation Army masquerading as companies. Why is he doing that? Is Larry Fink an ideological member of the Chinese Communist Party? Of course not, right? But as he said, markets like totalitarian government. Well, I think he's pretending like he gets to speak for markets. But no, there's a reason why these people are helping each other, why they're working together, and Rich Higgins, the director of policy and planning during the first Trump administration at the National Security Council, explained this. He said, what Trump is dealing with here is not normal politics. It's a Maoist-style insurgency. And he said you have a convergence of the Islamist movement, the globalist movement, the communist movement, all coming together, working together, he says, to destroy the United States of America, not just as a nation, but even as an ideal. And so I think that's what we're witnessing right now. That's why you see a government like the CCP collaborating with a government like the government in Pakistan or the Taliban in Afghanistan, right? What do the Taliban have in common with the CCP? Well, not much, but they hate America. They hate the world order that existed under America's leadership. And now they are working together to build a new one. And at first, it'll look like a multipolar world order. And after that, the consolidation phase. So.
Yeah, it's also interesting you mentioned, because I know that with a lot of the discussions about BRICS and the emerging BRICS and the dismantling of the more U.S.-centric unipolar world that emerged after World War II, that they talked a lot about multipolar world, right? And it's like, oh, we're not trying to, take everything for ourselves. We just want to play a fair playing field, and we want to have, these multiple different nations that kind of keep each other in check. But you make a very good point, though, that they don't view that as the end goal. That's just a stepping stone. It's like socialism. Well, socialism isn't the end goal. It becomes the stepping stone for a communist system to take root. And so you see that really the end goal of this, which that goal does involve the complete dismantling and destruction of America and of the Constitution, but that the end goal is these organizations or these groups, whatever you want to refer to them as, destroying America, bringing in a global system, most likely a global system that is really coming out of the East. And I've seen even a lot of the kind of the banking type folks or the more elitist referring to, as you mentioned, I think it was Soros discussing that as well, that they do see, it's almost like they shifted their favor. At one point, especially World War II, post-World War II, the United States became the great mechanism of control for the world. But as that has ran its course, probably starting in the 70s, Deng Xiaoping, Bill Clinton coming in later, opening everything up. Slowly, then the shifting is that, okay, now they're slowly kind of moving over. Now we're at the place where they're setting things up so that the center of the unipolar world after the phase of the multipolar world becomes China.
Yeah, and I think ultimately all roads will lead to Beijing. And they've got multiple plays that they're running. One that I've been tracking again for my entire career in journalism is the move toward regionalization. I think the multipolar phase will involve very strong regional governments. Obviously, the European Union is the premier example of this. But if you look, what the BRICS have in common is essentially every one of those governments is the anchor of its respective regional order. And Henry Kissinger outlines this in his book, World Order, published about 10 years ago. He talks about how the quest for world order is necessarily going to involve establishing these regional orders and then relating them one to another. And so you have the European Union serving as kind of the model, but these things are popping up all over the world, right? And I challenge people to just think about this for a second, right? What are the odds that everywhere in the world, every people, every nation just woke up and said, hey, what do we need this national sovereignty thing for? Why don't we just pool our sovereignty together with a bunch of countries that are kind of close to us that we share nothing in common with? It's absolutely ridiculous. This is a policy that's being imposed on people all over the world by the same kind of forces that we're talking about. The African Union's a really great example, right? You go ask your average African, and I've lived in Africa, I've been all over Africa. Ask your average African, what do you think of the African Union? The what? Oh yeah, that thing. We don't know anything about that. That's totally irrelevant to my life. Who's imposing an African Union on the Africans? Well, it's not the Africans who are asking for this. The Chinese Communist Party and the U.S. taxpayer and the European Union literally paid to build the headquarters in Addis Ababa, right? This is being imposed on them from the West and from the CCP. And the same thing is happening all over the world. It's even happening in North America. Kissinger described NAFTA as the most creative step toward a world order since the end of the Cold War. Now they've doubled down on NAFTA through the USMCA. They've further strengthened these North American tribunals, these North American regulatory bureaucracies. They've expanded the areas of law that these entities have jurisdiction over. So we're moving very rapidly now away from the old world order. I think we're watching what I describe as the controlled demolition of the American economy, the American system of government. I hope it doesn't succeed, but I think that's their plan. And then its replacement with this kind of regional constellation where you got the EU, the African Union. Putin, of course, is building the Eurasian Union, the SAARC down in South Asia. You've got the ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. And I don't even think the globalists themselves know exactly what it'll end up looking like, but I imagine they'll have somewhere between 7 and 12 of these regional governments, and then we'll start dividing up into alliances. And then eventually, I think their plan is all power and authority should be within the United Nations itself.
And so, gosh, I've got a lot of questions, but I want to keep myself focused. I know we don't have a huge amount of time. I want to be mindful of that. And so where do you think Trump fits into all this? Because I've been talking with my wife a lot about this lately, and the state of America and where things are at. And I do think that there is a lot of despair in this country. I think there's a lot of gaslighting. We're being told that we have this great economy and the stock market's all times high. Inflation's being cut back, but most people I talk to are not experiencing that life. They're struggling, working multiple jobs, just barely getting by. And if you look at what's happened under Trump so far, just looking at some of the bigger picture things that in terms of the lens of this arrangement, we're seeing that the 600,000 Chinese students coming in, which to me, it's like, okay, how many of those aren't CCP agents, right? Now, obviously not all of them, but that's exactly how they bring in their spy networks. We're seeing also the massive buildup of the Silicon Valley and the tech sector's role in governance. But you also see that those tech companies have very strong ties to CCP. They have very strong, control by the CCP. And so do you, and maybe we're getting a little bit into sensitive territory here, but I think it's, it's like with you, I feel very comfortable kind of getting into these things, but it's like, do you think that Trump is opposing this shift and opposing this kind of new order, or do you think that he is being used as a tool to help bring in this order and to help kind of, even though there's been these great promises and some good things, Trump has done some good things. I'm not going to just bash him. He's done some very good things I've been very happy with. However, there are some other things that I'm like, that's a big red flag right there. So how do you make sense of the current administration and this overall power play?
It's a very good question, Seth, and I don't know that anybody on our side has exactly the correct answer. I take a more nuanced point of view here, and I've been studying this very question all the way back to 2016, and a lot of sensible people who I respect, whose views I value, have argued to me that Trump must be part of this, that he is kind of playing as an actor on a stage. I am not convinced that that's the case. I do believe from what I've seen, the people in his administration that I have spoken with, and there are many of them, that he genuinely loves his country, that he genuinely opposes the global agenda. But I believe there's a compelling case to be made that he is being set up to be the ultimate fall guy to forever discredit the United States and the conservative movement and the Christian right and even the Republican Party. They have already indoctrinated a significant portion of our population and the population of the world to believe that Trump is some sort of dictator. And I believe they hope to force him into behaving like a dictator. We're watching, I think, something very similar to, if not directly attributable to, a color revolution in the streets right now. And we see the same exact tactics. We see even some of the same people involved that we've seen in other color revolutions around the world. I believe we're being set up for a massive economic collapse that I think will be blamed on Trump and his policies. And I believe they're trying to set the United States up for a civil war. And I don't say these things because I want them to be true. I don't want them to be true. I would like my country to continue. I would like Trump to be successful in trying to preserve our country. But I think if you just look objectively at what's going on, and you compare it with what has happened in other countries, I think our country's headed for some very tough times, and I think Trump's going to get the blame for a lot of the problems. Now, is he to blame for those problems? Generally speaking, no. Is he to blame for what happened during COVID? Some of it. I don't think he should have been so reliant on criminals like Anthony Fauci. I think he should have told them to go find another job. But ultimately, I think the globalists are looking at this situation. They see Trump, they see that he's opposed to what they're up to, and they're thinking, how do we make lemonade out of these lemons? And I think their chosen strategy now is to undermine everything important that he's trying to do. And we saw this during the first administration. He did a lot of good policy stuff, but it was all overturned on day one. So right now they're letting us look like we have a bunch of victories here, executive order on this, he's boycotting the climate summit. But when the economy starts doing poorly, and you combine that with some of the other problems, the World Economic Forum has been talking about a poly crisis that is coming our way. If you can blame even some of those things on Donald Trump, you thereby lay the groundwork for radical changes going forward. And That's my best assessment of where we're at right now. I hope I'm wrong. I hope it doesn't play out that way, but I hope Trump understands that there are powerful forces trying to walk him into a trap, and he needs to be very careful.
That's a very, I'm not sure if interesting is the right word, but it's a very broad perspective that you've come to with that. You're not just jumping on the easy answer and saying that, and that it does make sense actually, that there's, okay, as you said, that they're setting him up as the fall guy, right? That they need, that if they want to bring the American system to an end, they need to create a hero they can use, and use the energy and the inertia of that hero as the final, I guess, fuel, the final trigger for that collapse, right? So that's because, I mean, I think my own estimation, I think in 2016, he won by much larger margins than what we believed. I also think that I think that 2020, he won by a landslide. And I think obviously he won in 2024, even by much more than what they even told us. So I think that he does represent one of the more popular presidents in contemporary politics here in America. And so if they can, it makes sense though, that if they can set him up and create situations in this country that will then cause him, which we've already seen some of these things where he's actually taken national level control and put it into state level or local level, bringing in military into different cities and things. These are all things that, even if yes, there's major crime and bad things happening in Chicago, you are crossing into a line of dictator, or you're crossing into a line of really shredding the Constitution if you're bringing in federal troops to do things at a local or a state level, right? The Constitution is really about separating those powers. So you think that that's the goal. And so the color revolution that you've mentioned, which I know General Flynn has been talking about this is a lot lately as well. What do you see that color revolution being? What do you see these stages? If things go according to their plan, what would the next, say, year or two look like?
Well, I think we're already starting to see it. And I've been warning about this for many years. I actually did a whole episode of one of my shows, Behind the Deep State, about 3 years ago, where I said they're trying to cause a civil war in this country. Here's what they're doing. Here's what they're saying about it. And so I think their goal is to use a bunch of these jihadists that they've imported. It's to use a bunch of these leftists that they've brainwashed in the government schools and on the university campuses that they've got involved in these dumb groups like Antifa and these other communist and socialist groups. I think they're going to be used as cannon fodder. We're already starting to see a little bit of this with the violent protests, with the shooting at federal officers, with the slaughter of certain individuals like Charlie Kirk, just recently, this college Republican leader at Brown University. I think we're going to see much more of that. I think we'll see probably targeted assassinations against people in the political realm, people in law enforcement. I think they've got a list of sheriffs that they don't like, that they would like to take out, maybe even governors. And ultimately an effort to try to polarize the American people, balkanize the American people. And so right now, and you've seen it, it's all the white people. We got to get rid of the white people. Oh, it's the black people. If we could just get rid, it's the Jews. If we could just get rid of the Jews. Oh, it's the Catholics. Right? They're whispering this all over the place. They're trying to turn Americans against each other so that we will attack each other instead of realizing that we are in mortal danger as a nation and uniting to stop the genuine enemies of our republic, the genuine enemies of our liberty. So I hope it doesn't come to that. I hope the administration will take proactive steps within the bounds of the Constitution to prevent something like that from happening. I hope Americans will not be duped, whether it be a false flag or a real attack. That doesn't mean that your neighbor is a bad guy. That doesn't mean that you should go join some, militia under the leadership of, Joe Sixpack. We need to respect lawful authority. We have sheriff's departments, elected sheriffs. We have governors. We need to keep our lawful systems and authority in place. I think one of the goals is really to dissolve all of that, dissolve our local governments, dissolve our county governments, dissolve our state governments. And we need to be very careful with that, and we need to not be manipulated. So again, I don't think this is set in stone. I'm not trying to be a doomsday prophet and go get a bunker, but I think there are evil forces that are planning to try to collapse our country, and civil war or color revolution, or both at the same time, are very likely in the cards as part of their play.
And I would say, looking at the current state of our country, through my own kind of feelers and perception, I feel like that we're more divided as a country than we've ever been. Because, in 2016, you had the people that were pro-Trump, and is at least we're divided only in roughly two sides, right? Then you had the election 2020. 2020, I think, actually really unified a lot of conservatives around the election. You had a massive unity happening there heading into the election audits, the various things that were going on. And now you got 2024, and coming out post 2024, especially looking back at the past year, I think a lot of people that voted for Trump have felt betrayed. They've been divided over issues like Israel, over issues, lots of different issues actually. But I do feel like that we've become very, very fractured. And I think a fractured nation is a nation that is ripe for civil war, ripe for color revolution, a number of things like that. So it does, as much as I don't like to admit it, I have to agree with your assessment here.
Yeah, it's a frightening thought. And I would just encourage people, don't turn on your neighbors. Don't listen to the liars on your television telling you that your enemy is your neighbor or some person of a particular color or whatever like that. We do need to preserve our freedoms. We do need to be active, but we need to avoid falling into the traps and being manipulated like we were during COVID, like we've been so many times in the past. And I do believe our nation's in mortal danger. So now's not a time to sit back and relax. Now's a time to be active if you want to pass on the blessings of liberty to your children and your grandchildren.
Yeah, I think it's important. That's why these conversations are important. We need to take this seriously. Alex, where is the best place for people to follow your work?
Well, thank you so much. So all of our climate stuff, you're going to find at thenewamerican.com. My personal website, libertysentinel.org. People can sign up for our free newsletter there. I encourage them to do that. If you're looking for places to start finding good educational resources for your children, check out Classical Conversations. And I know you've talked with Robert Bortons before. Great stuff they're doing. That's where I have my children enrolled. And then on X, it's Alex Newman _JOU. We put all of this kind of stuff there. And I really appreciate you having me on, Seth. It's been a great honor, a great pleasure as always. And I hope we can talk again soon.
I hope so too. And I'll make sure we have some more time for that. So Alex, thank you again, man. Thank you for what you're doing. It's great speaking with you.
You too. Thank you so much.